Hi, this is Dahlia Lithwick, host of Slate's legal podcast, Amicus. If you're listening to this show, you might be interested in Amicus's live show that we're hosting in Washington, D.C. on Tuesday, May the 14th. My colleague, Mark Joseph Stern, and I will be talking to some amazing guests, including Sherrilyn Ifill and a sitting state Supreme Court justice, all about how originalism, a relatively recently invented way of interpreting the Constitution, has taken over the Supreme Court and radically reshaped the law. It's been doctrinal rocket fuel for the conservative legal movement and facilitated the rolling back of abortion rights, the expansion of gun rights, and the obliteration of the separation of church and state. And as another wildly consequential Supreme Court term careers to its end, the court's originalists are on a tear. But there's something you can do about it, and we hope you'll join us in D.C. on May 14th to explore the possible pathways out of the current situation. Go to slate.com/Amicus Live for tickets.
When I got epidemiologist Katelyn Jetelina on the line, she just wrapped up a meeting with the Biden administration about bird flu.
And it's basically an update about what the agencies are doing, what questions are getting answered from which lane, and perhaps most importantly, an opportunity to ask questions and push for better. And boy, do external scientists never disappoint in that arena. So it was definitely a fruitful conversation.
What do you mean when you say external scientists don't disappoint? Like they had a lot of questions for the White House or what?
Yeah, a lot of questions. And it wasn't, not just the White House, it's a lot of government agencies. There's been so much confusion about this response and lack of transparency in the past 2 months that we have a lot of questions and trying to understand the full picture and pushing for a better picture.
That means putting together data from a bunch of different places. The news that dairy cows in 36 herds in at least 9 states were infected, that one person got sick in Texas, and that federal regulators found genetic traces of H5N1, aka bird flu, in 20% of the retail milk supply. Not long after Katelyn's meeting, the White House briefed the media.
Obviously they are taking this very seriously. They're monitoring the situation. As far as we understand it to be, is that they believe that milk and consuming meat is safe.
Katelyn spent a lot of the last 4 years thinking, talking, and writing about COVID. And now there's another virus in the headlines, one we know a lot more about, but one that's doing some new things. Things we should probably pay attention to. Did you walk away feeling more confident about the direction that this response is going in?
I think it's starting to finally move in a more confident direction. I still have so many questions. Just what is this picture? How much risk is there? And what are we doing to prepare if this eventually jumps to humans?
Today on the show, we're talking bird flu in birds and cows and milk. I'm Lizzie O'Leary, and you're listening to What Next TBD, a show about technology, power, and how the future will be determined. Stick around.
This episode is brought to you by Discover. When it comes to your finances, Discover wants you to know they are the credit card that is always there for you. With 24/7 U.S.-based live customer service, everyone has the option to talk to a real person anytime, day or night. Yep, that means no more waiting for, quote, normal business hours just to get a hold of someone. We are talking real service from real people whenever you need it. Get the customer service you deserve with Discover. Limitations apply. See terms at discover.com/creditcard.
Eat stress-free this spring with Factor's delicious ready-to-eat meals. Every fresh, never-frozen meal is chef-crafted, dietitian-approved, and ready to eat in just 2 minutes. Choose from a weekly menu of 35 options, including popular options like Calorie Smart, Keto, Protein Plus, or Vegan and Veggie. Also, discover more than 60 add-ons every week, like breakfast, on-the-go lunch, snacks, and beverages to help you stay fueled and feel good all day long. What are you waiting for? Get started today and fuel up for your springtime goals. Get chef-prepared meals on the table in 2 minutes with Factor's ready-to-eat meals so you can get back to doing what you love this spring. Head to factormeals.com/whatnexttbd50 and use code whatnexttbd50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next box. That's code whatnexttbd50 at factormeals.com/whatnexttbd50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next box while your subscription is active. H5N1, or avian flu, bird flu, whatever you want to call it, has been around for a long time. And Katelyn wants to underscore that that's important.
The first recognition is that this is not novel. This isn't like COVID-19 where it kind of popped out of nowhere. We've been paying attention to H5 for at least 20 years and seeing it slowly but surely mutate over time. Birds started really experiencing the latest outbreak in 2022. And then we started detecting avian flu in mammals worldwide: seals, bears, mountain lions, fox, just to name a few. And then that brings us to today, where we're starting to see H5 detected in cows across many dairy farms, across many states. And the reason why this isn't alarming is because we've never really seen it in cows before. We've never even seen it transmitted cow to cow before. And so it's raising a lot of alarm bells and questions about what this virus is up to. And most importantly, if we're prepared to respond if this ends up jumping human to human transmission.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about the cows, because that is clearly the novel thing here. How do we imagine that these dairy cows got this in the first place?
It looks like through genomic surveillance. So that means getting cows tested and looking at the genetics of the virus, that there was really only one spillover event. And that was probably from a dead bird having contact with a cow. We think the latest hypothesis is through feed. But that kind of set off this chain of events where then cows started spreading it to each other, as well as to other birds and other poultry.
So far, only one person has tested positive for bird flu this year in the U.S., a farmer in Texas. Any human contracting bird flu is scary. The World Health Organization says the mortality rate from infection is roughly 56%, though that number comes from a very small sample size. Katelyn says, do not freak out just yet.
Yeah, I mean, I understand freaking out about it because it sounds very scary, and it potentially is, but there's a Texas farmer or agricultural worker that had very close contact with an infected cow and ended up getting symptoms. They were very mild symptoms, which was good news, mostly just red eye, and it resolved over time. Most importantly, it doesn't look like it spread from that worker to other workers, which is a great sign that this virus hasn't mutated. It is very rare for a human to get infected with bird flu, and we want to keep it that way. The other thing that's kind of going on here is we don't know if that's the only human case. There has been very little asymptomatic testing and limited symptomatic testing among workers for a myriad of reasons. And so we think this is the only human case connected to this outbreak, but that certainly could be incorrect.
And then, of course, traces of the virus showed up in milk. What does that mean from a scientific standpoint?
That's right. So what veterinarians did was they wanted to know where this virus was mutating or replicating quickly. And so they swabbed all parts of the cow. And what they found was that the most virus was in the udders. There was some virus in the lung tissue, a little in the nasal passageway, but overwhelmingly in the udders, which means that this is being spread through milk, which is odd. Usually we would expect this to be more respiratory, but it is what it is. Flu always surprises us. It looks like how it's spreading cow to cow is through the milk machines and exposure to milk.
But of course, milk that reaches customers is pasteurized.
Right. And so if it's in the cow milk, what they started doing was stopping these infected cow milk to go to market, which is great news. The problem is, so the FDA was like, oh, well, maybe we should start testing what's on our grocery store shelves. And what they ended up finding was that there were viral fragments of H5 in the milk we buy at grocery stores. And so this tells us two things. One, it tells us that this outbreak is actually far more extensive than we anticipate because that milk's supposed to be stopped before it makes it to market. This also raised a second question of how safe is our milk if there are viral fragments in there?
If your milk is pasteurized, there's no need to worry. When the FDA tested pasteurized milk samples, the viral fragments were all dead.
So it's very safe for us to drink pasteurized milk. An added complexity here is that people actually drink raw milk. That's not pasteurized, and that can be incredibly dangerous. And it is incredibly dangerous, and especially now that we're seeing this huge H5 outbreak among cows.
I want to talk about what we don't know, because as you've alluded, the data is not fulsome. We're not talking about a huge picture here. These data points that you're describing make me think, oh, are we seeing the full scope of this situation or more of a tip of the iceberg kind of thing?
I certainly feel like we're just looking through a peephole of a door.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, we have so many unanswered questions, and it's been frustrating trying to get data transparency and communication from a united front from the U.S. government. I think this is slowly changing, but we need to get better faster. I mean, one of the biggest questions we have is how big is this true outbreak, right? USDA says that it's 33 dairy, I think it's like 38 now, cattle herds in 8 states. But we know from the fragments in the milk supply as well as genomic surveillance that it's much larger than these 36 herds. And because we're not doing systematic testing, it's almost impossible to get a handle on where this is and how it's spreading.
One question swirling around bird flu is how animals are tested. Most are not, unless they have symptoms. Recently, the federal government required testing all cows that are moved from state to state. But for the people who work within the dairy industry, things are more complicated. Some workers are temporary or hourly or undocumented, and admitting that you're sick could have huge consequences.
And there's a lot of challenges that come around to asking agricultural workers to test. I mean, one of them is if they test positive, they can't work. And that has huge implications for their families. There's also big language barriers that health departments are finding on the ground, as well as massive trust issues with government institutions, given that some of these are undocumented. And so we really need to approach this human testing side hand in hand with stakeholder buy-in in order to improve trust. Because the last thing we want to do is start mandating everyone to test. And of course, that is a last resort at this point.
How has the industry responded to the idea of voluntary tests, of, talking about potential exposure in workers?
I think it's a good question. I mean, I've only heard through anecdotes that ag workers also want to get this under control, right? They have major implications to their bottom line, to exports, to their daily lives. I've been very happy to see that at least a lot of us on the ground are approaching this as a One Health perspective, that healthy animals means healthy humans and vice versa. It's just we need a whole lot more coordination and leadership at the top to help.
When we come back, okay, this time is the government prepared?
Apple Card is the perfect cashback rewards credit card. You earn up to 3% daily cash on every purchase every day. That's 3% on your favorite products at Apple, 2% on all other Apple Card with Apple Pay purchases, and 1% on anything you buy with your titanium Apple Card or virtual card number. Visit apple.co/card calculator to see how much you can earn. Apple Card issued by Goldman Sachs Bank, USA, Salt Lake City branch. Subject to credit approval. Terms apply.
The Coca-Cola Company, Keurig Dr. Pepper, and PepsiCo are bringing consumers more choices with less sugar than ever before. From sparkling, flavored, and bottled waters to zero-sugar sports drinks, teas, and sodas, consumers are taking advantage of these choices. In fact, nearly 60% of beverages sold contain zero sugar. To learn more, visit balanceus.org.
Hey everybody, it's Neil. I've got some huge news. Decoder is moving to Mondays and Thursdays. We're adding a second episode to the show. On Mondays, we'll have our classic interviews with CEOs and other troublemakers.
I think we're going to have to start having conversations about how do we pay those jobs that can't be done by AI.
And on Thursdays, we'll be explaining big topics in the news with Verge reporters, experts, and other friends of the show.
There's a new generation of people on the internet. Google search has always sucked for them. So, there's no reason for them to be loyal. They can just go to TikTok.
This is going to be really fun. I'm very excited about all this. So go subscribe wherever you get your podcasts now.
How else are you trying to quantify what's happening? I've noticed that you're writing about wastewater surveillance as well.
Verily just posted a preprint this week showing that, H5N1 is detected in wastewater sewer sheds. But we haven't really heard anything official from the government about how we're using wastewater monitoring, which is disappointing given this is really a perfect use case of how to translate our COVID infrastructure to another threat. But there are a lot of still unanswered questions with wastewater, right? Okay, we're seeing it spike in areas around these farms. Well, is this human? Is it animal? We think it's animal, but then how is animal getting into our wastewater? Is it from milk dumping? Is it from animal sewage? So we certainly need a lot more data. Another place that wastewater could help is we could start doing genomic surveillance there. So one frustration is that USDA isn't sharing a lot of their testing data so we can understand how this is mutating and where. And so one workaround is leveraging our wastewater. If we can take samples from that wastewater and start doing genomic surveillance, then we may have more visibility on how far this is spreading, where is it mutating, and where it may be going.
A lot of the words that you are using are, of course, going to trigger memories and emotions in people's minds about the depths of COVID. I think probably the biggest question a lot of listeners will have is whether they need to worry. What do you think?
Yeah, I am getting this question a lot, even from my neighbors, and it reminds me a lot about COVID. I think it's really important to recognize that right now the risk is incredibly low. This is not an alarm 5 emergency. And we have a lot of spillover events. Very few turn into pandemics because there has to be a lot of unlucky things that happen in sequence to turn this into a pandemic. So I don't like the comparisons of this is March of 2020, even January 2020, because we're not seeing human-to-human transmission. Is this more October 2019 when we saw a spillover? Maybe, but what brings me hope is that we are starting to follow it. We just really need to take it seriously and approach it with humility. And I mean we, meaning epidemiologists, veterinarians, U.S. government, rather than the average Joe needing to actually do something today.
A lot of the government agencies that are involved in this are familiar to people from COVID, but there's also the USDA, the Department of Agriculture, which is deeply involved in monitoring and advocating for U.S. agriculture. Does that complicate the response at all, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely complicates it because they're yet another player, right, that has their own questions, has their own priorities, has their own experience in outbreaks. This is really USDA's first rodeo. They didn't get slapped by COVID-19. Those that did get slapped by COVID-19, CDC, have actually been incredibly happy to see how quickly they've been communicating. Even if this has just been one human, they seem to be very on top of it. And so I certainly think that's playing a role here. I think also there's that industry pressure that we talked about a little, as well as I don't think we can ignore politics. I hate bringing politics into every conversation, but this is an election year, right? And I could assume that people are just not wanting to piss off big lobbyists, like the agriculture industry.
You have spent so much time in the past few years also writing about the issue of trust in public health, trust in government, trust in scientific communication. Do you think government agencies and people like you have the trust of the public right now to be able to come out and say, like, hey, this is where we stand, and get believed?
Yeah, I mean, I hope people trust me, but I certainly know that there's this incredible lack of trust in government institutions for a myriad of reasons. And that's where I think that's why it's important for the government to have a coordinated one front response. Yeah, there's multiple players involved. Yeah, they have all their own priorities, own legal authorities, own experience in politics. But when it comes down to it, honest, frequent, and direct communication earns public's trust and confidence. If not, communities are starved for good information during outbreaks and emergencies, leading to unnecessary anxiety, confusion, and incredible frustration. What I've seen in the past month and a half isn't how government's going to gain the trust from on the ground. I do think government agencies are finally starting to host live briefings for the media, and we're starting to slowly see positive steps in the right direction. And I hope it is a sign that the winds are changing. But we just need to get better faster. This H5N1 is a very dangerous disease that can affect our health, but also economy and food security. And it's really difficult to watch on the heels of COVID-19.
What makes it so dangerous?
We think that this actually has a higher mortality rate than, for example, COVID-19. Some numbers have been thrown out that it has a 50% mortality rate. I'm very skeptical of this, given that this mortality rates among cases we know there's asymptomatic spread. We also know that we have some cross protection with our flu immunity, but I also don't want to find out either. And so it's starting to make a lot of people nervous, and we need to figure it out. I think the other thing that makes this dangerous is that it's flu. It's very unpredictable in how it works. And we still have so many questions about pathways and how one species gets infected terribly while another doesn't, et cetera. And so I think we need to figure out those questions before, if and when this moves to humans.
The government has said there is a stockpile of Tamiflu, the antiviral drug, also a vaccine. Do you have any sense of how robust that is, and also whether we have the capacity to ramp up vaccine production should we need it?
The government did come out and confirm that Tamiflu works, and we do have stockpiled H5N1 vaccines that have pretty good efficacy for ferrets, and ferrets is a good kind of proxy to humans. I think that this is great news. And again, very different than COVID, where we're kind of starting from zero. And I agree there shouldn't be panic, but I do caution, for example, leaders and trusted messengers against using the we're fine, we have vaccines attitude. We got in trouble with this with COVID-19 because, like you said, what about manufacturing and supply? We certainly don't have 330 million vaccines in stockpile. What about the rest of the globe? What about vaccine hesitancy and decline in trust and access problems? All of these were really big mistakes during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think it's really best to face these threats with humility and determination.
There's sort of this weird duality here because, and I think this is partly because of COVID, the fear of, oh God, this could, be the next epidemic, even pandemic, versus, well, let's not scare people too much. Let's stick to what we know. And I guess I just wonder, like, where do you think is the right place to land?
Oh, it's such a hard question because I think we're all trying to figure this out, right? Like, I think one silver lining of the pandemic is that people now know a lot about infectious diseases. They know that there's actions they can take to protect themselves. However, even before this pandemic, we see threats all the time. And so to a certain point, ignorance is bliss. One of the biggest concerns I have is crying wolf, that we increase the anxiety. Like I said, there's many spillover events, very few pandemics. I think it's actually like a 2% chance we're going to get a pandemic every year. But if that does spill, it's high consequences. And so, finding this balance is incredibly difficult, and I don't envy anyone trying to find it right now.
Katelyn Jetelina, thank you so much for talking with me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Katelyn Jetelina writes the newsletter Your Local Epidemiologist. She's also a senior advisor to the CDC. And that's it for our show today. What Next TBD is produced by Evan Campbell, Shayna Roth, Patrick Fort, and Anna Phillips. Our show is edited by Paige Osborne. Alicia Montgomery is vice president of audio for Slate, and TBD is part of the larger What Next family. And if you like what you hear, there is a great way to support our work. Become a Slate Plus member. Just head on over to slate.com/whatnextplus to sign up. We'll be back on Sunday with another episode. I'm Lizzie O'Leary. Thanks for listening.
We all have that friend who wakes up early to go get everyone McDonald's breakfast, while the rest of us sleep in. This is your sign to thank them. And if you're that friend, this is us saying thank you.
Just a friendly reminder that right now, get any size iced coffee before 11 a.m. for just 99 cents. And a satisfying sausage McMuffin with egg is just $2.79. Price and participation may vary. Cannot be combined with any other offer or combo meal.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.